Good morning. I'm a little under the weather today, so I'm filming in the morning in my pajamas. But I wanted to talk about something because this morning as I was scrolling through YouTube, somebody had reposted a news anchor, and the comment that was made was very striking. And I thought, well, you know what? That will give me inspiration for this video. I had planned to do a different video. I was going to be outside of my yard working, but because I'm under the weather, that didn't happen, and I thought this would be a good topic to talk about with everyone. I have Jack's Creamsicle and Pepper here. This comment was made by a news anchor, like I said, and to my knowledge, news anchors make probably over $500,000 a year. I know that many of them make into the millions. I don't know the average household that makes that kind of money. Now, granted, there are people that make that kind of money. I'm talking about the average household. When I was in 8th grade, many years ago, I was selected out of the entire county of students to participate in a summer course for journalism. During that course, all of the students published articles and published them in a magazine, and they were about homelessness in America. Therefore, I do think I'm an appropriate voice, and why saying a comment such as, we give them free resources, it's not our fault if they don't use them. I find that comment to be very irresponsible in my opinion. My area has one food bank. When I was growing up and in grade school, middle school, before I reached high school, there was a weekly food kitchen. And the weekly food kitchen was different than a food bank. At this food kitchen, anyone was allowed to go once a week. I believe it was Wednesday nights at 6, and they served a free pasta dinner. And you got something like a serving of spaghetti, sauce, maybe a meatball, and a piece of bread. There were no seconds allowed. Everybody got the same portion on their plate. My family never had to utilize this option, but I know people who did, and without that food service, they would have most likely gone hungry. Since then, since about the time I was in high school, the town opened a food bank. They closed the food kitchen. I think the food kitchen was run by a local church group. I would say my children were about 2 and 3 when an article was published in the local Reader. It's a little free newspaper that everybody gets in their mailbox. This article was written by the director of the food bank in town, and it said that they had a shortage and were in great need for their annual Thanksgiving food basket drive. And they were looking for items such as mac and cheese, stuffing, peanut butter, cranberry sauce in a can, green beans, corn in a can, yams in a can, boxes of rice, frozen turkeys, things of that nature. When my children were 2 and 3, of course, I didn't have a lot of extra money to dish out to donate. I figured, you know what I can do is I can bake. I went down to the food bank and I said, look, I have 2 children of my own, so I don't really have hundreds of dollars I can donate right now. However, is it possible to have a bake sale? Can I have a bake sale in front of the food bank to raise money to help with attaining your goal? The food bank was very vague in this article. They didn't actually publish a goal. The director said to me, no, I could give them money. How about I donate a can of green beans? I found this very condescending, rude, and quite frankly unhelpful. I said, look, I'm trying here. How about I directly help a family? Is there a family I can help with a Thanksgiving dinner? Help with what they need? And the food bank director said, oh no, that's illegal and unethical. We can't give you the names of people who are in need. And I said, I understand that, but is there a way you could give them my information? Could you pair me with somebody? Because years prior, they had paired students that had come over from different countries they had paired them with families. And I thought, well, maybe this could be the start of something. You can pair a family with another family. And the director thought I was dumb. She was like, no, if you can't afford to donate, then just forget it. Other people will. I thought that was horrible. And I was more determined than ever to do something, because now I'm just feeling like that was just plain rude. And how would a family in need feel about that? How would they look at that? What would they think of that? This director talking to me that way and basically shuffling everybody off like, no, we don't want your help unless you can give us money. And it kind of empowered me to seek out what I could do legally to help. And the food bank wasn't willing to let me help them. I thought, this is ridiculous. So I reached out to certain people and we gathered together, and there was a store in town, which unfortunately is no longer there. It was a mom and pop shop that got shut to the side when bigger box stores came into town. And they offered me their sidewalk space. They said, we rent here. It was a little strip mall plaza. If you get in touch with the owner and he gives you permission, we will gladly support your cause. And they rallied for me. This was a small mom and pop store, and they rallied for the cause. They saw that my heart was really into it. They wanted to help people, and they thought that the food bank was totally off the wall ridiculous. My feeling about it is, if you're going to advertise that you need help, don't turn it away when it comes knocking. I had these 2 little desks for my children. They were perfect toddler size, and they both had a chalkboard top. So what I did was I sat them down and I explained I was going to be baking for people that were hungry. And my toddlers at the time could understand that. They could understand that somebody was hungry, and they were okay with that, and they agreed to help me. So I got out my plastic cookie cutters that didn't have any sharp edges, and I set them out on their little desks. As I rolled out dough, they asked me if they could play with some flour and sugar. I put that out on a little tray to not make such a big mess. And my son would ride his Matchbox cars through that, or my daughter would make pretend cookies. It was super, super adorable. But the point was, my children were learning that mommy is helping somebody, and they were wonderful through this experience. We baked all kinds of things. I baked breads, cookies, cakes. I also had some local college students that wanted to help because they needed letters of reference to get further in their studies. So they reached out and said, hey, we heard through the grapevine that you're doing this. Can we help you because we need letters of reference? And I said, absolutely. I'd be happy to give you a letter of reference that you did community service. This was 20 years ago, just about 20 years ago. Not quite, but close enough. And we raised over $600. Now that may not seem like a lot of money. That might seem like, was it really worth it? To me, it was worth it. Even though it does seem like a small amount, like how far can $600 go? Well, back then it could go further than it can today, but it gained momentum. Other people took notice. During the bake sale, not only the owners of this little mom and pop shop came out and donated, they also brought baked goods to sell. And then people started showing up at the food bank with checks and donations. I'm talking thousands of dollars. So as I'm standing there at this bake sale and all the college students had left, I was alone manning the table. Finally, it was at the end of the day and I sold everything out, which is usually the case, especially like if you've ever been to a church bake sale, you would see that homemade goodies sell out before anything. The most touching part of my day was when a homeless man approached me. And he said, I would love to have a chocolate chip cookie, but I don't have any money. So I reached for one, and I took it up in a napkin, and my feeling about that was, this is why I'm here. And I didn't say that out loud, of course, but I handed him the cookie. And he took the cookie and he kind of held my fingers open. He reached into his pocket and he put 10 dimes in my hand. He said, "This is all I have." And I said, "I don't want your money. I want you to have a cookie." And he held my hand. And he was dressed in a very dirty old shirt, dirty jeans, and you could tell he had not had a shower, and he was not shaven in days. And he said, "You have no idea what this means to me. I want to give back." And he kind of shuffled away, but he clearly wasn't there for a handout. He wanted to give back to the cause. And I had not asked him for any money, but he gave it to me. And I want that to stick with you for a minute. I was truly inspired by everybody in the community that came out and donated. Some people just donated and didn't take a baked good. Other people drove up in very expensive cars and took an entire cake and left $1. When I went back to the food bank, I was carrying a coffee can that I had wrapped a piece of paper around and wrote donations on. It had a slit in the top for the money. I had not opened that coffee can at that point. I did not know what money was in there, and I had a witness with me because I didn't want the food bank to think I took any of the money. They laid it out. They opened that can, they laid all the money out, and they counted it. And it was over $600. And it wasn't just the $600. It was the fact that because of this, other people, unbeknown to me, had gone into the food bank and donated thousands of dollars. In fact, that was about 20 years ago, and I've never ever seen the food bank ask for another donation since. They have a fund set up for their annual Thanksgiving food basket drive, and it's funded fully. What we do in this lifetime creates momentum, even if it's small. Even if you have nothing to give, but you have an idea, and you get the right minds together, things will happen. It builds momentum. While I was there, I had my children in a stroller, and a family came in with small children, and they had just moved to the area, and they didn't have work yet, and therefore they had no money for food. I was quite surprised when the director told the young mother that the food bank only gives out food once a month unless you are enrolled with them and have proof of wages and or proof of non-wages, and otherwise you're allowed to take one loaf of bread. And I looked at her and I said, "Are you kidding me? That's it? This young family comes to you for help and that's all they can get until when?" She said, "Well, there's an application process." I said, "So you're telling me that nobody hungry can just walk in here and get food?" She's like, "No, that's not what the services of a food bank are for." I said, "Then explain to me, please." And I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to understand. What are the services of a food bank for? And she said, "We provide people that are verified, that have low income, with weekly food distribution. They are allowed to have one paper bag full of dried goods from our pantry shelves, which consists mainly of mac and cheese, peanut butter, cans of tuna, cans of beans, dried beans, pasta, and in between, they're allowed to pick up a loaf of bread if they run out of everything else. I said, that quite frankly, that's horrible. And I said, you know, sometimes people are just down on their luck. And that's horrible. Is it because there's lack of monetary donations, lack of funding? And she said, no, this is what we found best to help people. And just at that moment, a man walked in who was homeless. He said he was tired, he was hungry. He wasn't verified because, of course, he's homeless. And she said, well, sir, there's nothing we can give you right now. You need to become verified. And I looked at her and I said, what about the donations I just dropped off? And she says, oh, you know what? You're right. And she turned around and she handed this man a frozen turkey. I'm not joking about that. I would never joke about that. She handed this man a frozen turkey. And I looked at her at the same time this man looked at her, and we both said, well, he said, how am I supposed to cook it? And I said, how is he supposed to cook it? And she said, that's not my problem. I gave him food. About 10 years ago, I noticed a gathering of very expensive cars. Range Rovers, Mercedes, Lexus, BMWs, and they were all at the food bank. And I thought, oh, interesting. Wonder what that's all about. So I started asking around. And I found out that there was a food distribution once a week at the food bank, open to anyone, and it was fresh vegetables. Anyone could go there and pick up a bag, just one bag per household of fresh vegetables, cucumber, zucchini, tomato, eggplant, and so forth. I didn't see one car there that looked less than a year old. I didn't see a minivan. I didn't see any cars that were low in value. And I was really shocked. I found out that the food was only passed out until it ran out. And all these people were there first. A couple years later, I learned that the food bank started consigning little postage-sized stamps of land and renting the space to everybody in the community who wanted to grow their own vegetables. You could pay the food bank for a very small parcel of land. It was about a 36 by 36 plot. Now, anybody that's ever grown vegetables knows that's not a whole lot. I mean, you can't grow pole beans. You might be able to grow a couple of tomato plants, maybe some bush beans, lettuce. Those things might grow in a plot that small, but typically you need more space to grow anything else significant. You know, if you want to grow pole beans, you're going to need more space. If you want to grow potatoes, you're going to need more space. So this to me was a tragedy that they were charging for these plots that where you could barely grow anything. When I went gluten-free about 10 years ago, around there anyway, it dawned on me. There are a lot of children these days with allergies. I know when my kids were going through school, they had separate areas for kids with peanut allergies. I know a lot of kids had gluten allergies. At bake sales, we were told to label each item that we brought with the ingredients in it. We weren't allowed to bring items with peanuts, things like that, because of the allergies are so prevalent now. And I thought, I wonder if the food bank is still asking for peanut butter, mac and cheese, pasta, or if they do have a section of gluten-free. I got the answer to my question when I was going to my storage unit. The owner of the storage unit decided to have a donation drive one day, and when I went in there, she was collecting specifically gluten-free items because her daughter's child was gluten-free, and therefore she knew that there was a lack of gluten-free items, peanut-free items, and so this drive was specific for children with allergies. And I thought that was so nice that she took the time to do that, to make awareness in the community. Now, there's another side to this that many don't know of. I thought it was pretty odd that only expensive vehicles were showing up at the food bank collecting all of the fresh produce, and there were no mom minivans there, and I just assumed naturally that they got there too late and everything ran out. This isn't the case. This isn't the case at all. And I'll tell you what I know. I know of a young couple that was living in the woods because they were homeless. They both had jobs. They were unable to find an apartment. This happened a couple years ago, right when all of the rent prices started to spike. They were looking for an apartment in the range of $800, and there was just none to be found. The closest they could come to that was about $1,200 for a studio. They set off in the woods, they had tents, and they were living there for a while, and she got pregnant. A friend of a friend called me up and said, "Hey, I know a lady living in the woods, homeless. She's now pregnant." She went to live with her sister. And they've had several children since. The sister and her husband could no longer have them in their home. They have a very tiny home with one bathroom, and they have children of their own. So there was no way they could house all these people in their small home. They went to the state and said, "Hey, what can we do about this? They need help." The state said that there was a 1 to 2 year waiting list for any type of housing, and there was nothing they could do for them. During this time, they were already receiving funding from the state. They were receiving multiple resources from the state. They received a supplemental card. They could buy milk, I think eggs, maybe some cheese, and fresh produce. The fresh produce portion of that was about $60 a week. My friend said they never ate any of that produce and it rotted. Every week it rotted. The other portion was the actual food stamps. Thankfully, I've never had to participate in these programs, so I don't really know the technical terms. I'm just relaying it as it was explained to me. I think it's called food stamps. And they got a card with money on it, and they were getting about $800 a month for food. In addition, this family is now homeless again, but this time they are living in a shelter, and I don't know where or what shelter, but they are living in a shelter, and they are on a waiting list for public housing. And the state is providing everything they need during this time. And the state said they would be in this shelter for about 1 to 2 years. So I want to go back to that homeless man that I talked about who gave me 10 dimes for a cookie. That man gave all he had so that somebody else could have. And then the opposite of that can be true as well. There are some people that take when they don't need. So my assumption about the food bank only passing out fresh produce to the wealthy wasn't correct, because the homeless family demonstrates that they get supplemental fresh produce. So going back to that, where I was talking about the wealthiest people coming to the food bank and showing up for the free fresh produce, well, you can't really blame them. If it's there, and it's there for everyone. But it just goes to my point that food banks are broken, and I don't know the answer to fix it. I think gaining momentum with community involvement is one way to approach it, just like I did with the bake sale, and I got people involved, got college students involved. I'm talking about people who truly need help, like the homeless guy that walked in and he tried to get some food and they gave him a frozen turkey and he doesn't even have a home or an oven to cook it in. I proposed to the food bank I would set up free classes for anyone who wanted to learn how to cook. I could show people how to make rice from dry rice because it's cheaper, or it was at the time. I don't know about now. It was cheaper then to buy rice in grain form than it was to buy, like, say, a box of minute rice or pre-cooked rice. I could show people how to cook it. How about you let me show people how to bake a chicken? A simple baked chicken. Ironically, today, it's cheaper here to go to the store and get a pre-cooked chicken than it is to buy a whole fresh chicken. The pre-cooked chickens are like $7. The raw ones are like 12 to 20. It's crazy to me. But at the time, I offered this. I offered all of this for free. I said, I will volunteer. I will come here once a week. I will do an online course. Whatever it is, I'm offering this to you. And they told me no. They said, nope, absolutely not. And they would never let me help anyone. And that's why I had to walk away from our local food bank and never look back. When I want to donate to a cause, I look at my local shelters. I look at the surrounding towns who do have food kitchens. And I donate to reputable charities. I do not drop off food at the food bank anymore. I hope you found this topic interesting. Thank you so much for watching this video. Take care.